Hi, this is Mr. Chandler. In this unit, we're going to look at the start of the two-party system. Today we have two political parties, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. Now we have other parties too, but those are the two parties that really have a chance to win most election. So what we're going to talk about today is how that system developed. It actually started during the presidency of George Washington, basically between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and it started over differences in opinion over issues in the national government. There were some controversies and some different foreign policies, and so that's what's going to start the two political parties, the Democrat Republicans and the Federalists. These are not the same two. The first two are actually not the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. That's a common misconception. The Federalists and Anti-Federalists are actually about ratifying the Constitution. So you can see the two people behind me are the ones who actually started the two political parties, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. The party system is actually not in the Constitution. George Washington is the only president that didn't belong to a political party. In fact, he's against all political parties, and he makes that very well known in the Farewell Address, along with a couple other things. The framers of the Constitution actually envisioned a system where a large number of people would run for office, specifically president, and that the winner would be the candidate with the most votes, and the vice president would be the runner-up. It actually doesn't really work out that way when you have two political parties, and so they're going to have to amend the Constitution to make that work after the election of 1800. The two-party system actually develops as a result of political differences between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, the two guys behind me. Alexander Hamilton was the Secretary of Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State in Washington's first administration. They really don't have much in common. So we're going to talk about a few of the major issues that separate them. And you're going to have to know these issues, and actually you're going to have to make a political commercial about them. Hamilton proposes that the government pay off the debt left from the Revolutionary War by issuing new bonds. He wants to kind of set things fresh after the Revolutionary War. He wants the current bondholders to have a stake in the national government. He wants the elite and the wealthy to have a say. Meanwhile, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison believed that paying off the current bondholders would be a bad idea because often it was investors had bought bonds. So what bonds are where during a war, generally, the government will sell what's called a bond, and citizens will buy that bond, and then after the war, the government will pay it off with interest. Well, what happened is after the Revolutionary War, the economy collapsed, and so the government couldn't really pay those back. And so those bonds the value ended up dropping and dropping and dropping until they were almost worthless. And then these speculators had come in and bought all the bonds, and so the common people didn't even own the bonds anymore. It would have been like these rich like banks and stuff that owned most of the bonds. So what ends up happening is Congress does go along with Hamilton's plan and pays off the debt left from the Revolutionary War. The next issue also has to deal with debt. Hamilton's going to propose that the national government assume the debts of the states. The northern states love this idea, and Hamilton is from the north. They support the plan because they had a lot of outstanding debts from the war. The southern states, meanwhile, are opposed to it, again for selfish reasons, because they'd pretty much already paid off their debts, with the exception of South Carolina. What they're going to eventually compromise on, and so you have the northern states that are Hamilton, southern states mostly Jefferson here. So they're going to compromise and say that the capital is going to be moved from New York to the south, and that state debts would be assumed. And so the capital is moved to Washington, D.C. And that's I know we don't really think of Washington, D.C. as being the South in South Carolina, but it is. It's in between Maryland and Virginia, which are two southern states. Another big issue is that Hamilton's going to propose the Congress establish a national bank that's going to act as a repository. That means a place where they're going to put the nation's revenues, and it's also going to be a source of loans to help spur the economic growth. The problem is the Constitution doesn't specifically say that Congress can create a national bank. Hamilton is going to argue that it's necessary and proper. This is what's called the Elastic Clause, which we will go over in depth in class. He's going to say that it's necessary and proper to Congress that they be able to establish a national currency and regulate trade, and therefore they need to have a national bank. Like I said, it's not listed in the Constitution, but it kind of falls under the Elastic Clause, which means that we can stretch the Constitution to fit our needs. The purpose of the Bank of the United States would be to help create financial order and clarity in this new United States. It'll establish credit, and it'll also resolve the issue of currency. It's going to be funded with bonds. That's how it's going to, you can see actually one of one of the banknotes up at the top here. Jefferson and Madison they object to it because it's really, the power is not given to Congress in the Constitution. They believe in what's called the strict interpretation of the Constitution, which means if it's not written in the Constitution, they don't believe they have the right to do it. They also felt that the bank benefits merchants and investors. And remember, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both believe in farmers and the common man. And so there's a big difference between Hamilton and Jefferson and who supports them. Hamilton tends to support the merchants and the business owners, while Jefferson tends to support the farmers. What's going to happen is that Congress is going to pass the national bank, and Washington's going to sign it into existence, and it's going to last up until Andrew Jackson. And we'll talk about Andrew Jackson's fight against the national bank in a couple units. The next big issue is that Hamilton wants Congress to propose a protective tariff. That's a tax on imported goods. What it's meant to do is to protect American-made products. So this high tax on imports is going to lead consumers to buy lower-priced goods that are produced here, and it's going to protect our industries. And it's meant to help us because Britain really quit trading with us after the Revolutionary War. So we need to have our own American manufacturers to make goods. Jefferson, though, is from the South, and he believes democracy depends on the independent farmer. And he supports an agrarian economy. And he doesn't want to move to an industrial economy. He thinks that's bad. And plus, having a tariff on imported goods is going to hurt the South more than it's going to hurt the North, rather. So it's going to hurt the South a lot. Congress ends up not passing the protective tariff, but this is going to be a big issue in American politics. If you don't understand what protective tariff means, then ask in class. We need to go over that. You need to really understand protective tariff. The next big issue is that Hamilton's going to propose an excise tax on whiskey. He wanted to control the drinking habits of Americans and he wanted to raise money for the government. This isn't really a sales tax, but it would be passed along to consumers through higher prices. Jefferson and Madison disagree with it. Remember, they support farmers. They think that any tax on the farmers is going to hurt Americans, hurt the common Americans. And so it's going to end up, there's actually going to end up being a rebellion that happens whenever this whiskey tax is passed. The rebellion is going to be kind of similar to Shays' rebellion in a sense, except for George Washington is going to march out and put that rebellion down, which is going to show that our national government is now strong enough to deal with these types of problems. It does show a split between the two political groups, between the Democrat-Republicans and the Federalists. So the two parties. Federalists are supporters of Hamilton. They want a strong central government. If you understand that they want a strong central government, then everything else will kind of fall into place. They're mostly wealthy merchants and industrialists in the North. They favored what was called loose interpretation of the Constitution, which we just talked about, the elastic clause. That means that it doesn't necessarily have to be said in the Constitution as long as it's something that's necessary and proper so it can stretch, so the Constitution can stretch or shrink to fit our needs. And they believe in the Bank of the United States. Thomas Jefferson's party is called the Democrat-Republicans. Sometimes they're referred to as the Jeffersonian Republicans, and then later they're going to be known as Democrats. These are supporters of Jefferson and Madison, and they want a smaller, limited central government with stronger state governments. So kind of like what the Anti-Federalists wanted too, so we're kind of in that same idea. They thought that the states were the closest to the will of the people. They supported the common man, specifically farmers, and they believed in the strict interpretation of the Constitution, like I explained earlier. So if it's not written in the Constitution, they don't believe they could do it. They also oppose the development of an industrialized country. Now we're going to move into foreign affairs. Jefferson was the Secretary of State. That means he was in charge of like the foreign affairs and negotiating with other countries, and he was our chief diplomat. Jefferson and Hamilton also disagreed a lot about foreign policy as well. One of the big issue for foreign policies was the French Revolution had turned violent at this point. Hamilton had to support, or really supported, the British in their war against the French Revolution because of our long tradition with the British and our trade relations with our former mother country, while Jefferson and Madison supported the French. They agreed with the French because of They agreed with the French because of what the French believed in, the Declaration of Rights of the Man and the Citizen, and because the French borrowed heavily from our own Declaration of Independence. They felt like we owed them because of them helping us in the American Revolution. Well, what George Washington as the president decides to do is he just stays out of it. He thinks that we should stay out of all foreign entanglements, and he says that in his farewell address too, along with the fact that we shouldn't have political parties, which we don't agree. Apparently, we don't follow either one of those two ideas that Washington had. The basic disagreement's made worse by some of the events that happened. One of those is the Citizen Genet incident. Genet had he was a diplomat to the United States, and he had two important requests: the right of the French to arm privateers in American ports, those are like pirates, and the early payment of debt owed to France. And so he tried to persuade George Washington to go along with those, but George Washington didn't, and so he defies Washington, and he goes against what Washington wants him to do, and so Washington actually kicks him out of the United States, and it turns into a major foreign policy issue. Another issue is Jay's Treaty, which is going to help us avoid War with Britain. What's going to happen is the treaty is going to take the British out of Western posts within the United States, and it's going to help solve the problem with the British. Another major problem that happens is the XYZ affair. These are French diplomats. They came over to the United States trying to negotiate. And they said in order to negotiate, we'd have to bribe them, and it turns into a major political issue. Turns into major problems, and so we end up having issues with the French. And with all that tension going on in the United States, there are two laws that are passed that are actually against the Constitution. And those are the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Federalists had controlled Congress at the time, and so they passed a series of laws. And these laws were, what they did was they prevented people from really speaking out against the government. And they're really intended to destroy the Democrat-Republican Party. If you spoke out against the government in a public way, you could be put in jail for it. And so this is the major violation of the First Amendment rights. And we're going to have another Sedition Acts again after World War I. Both of them are going to end up being declared unconstitutional, and they're going to end up being wiped out. But for the time, they are going to be used. So Jefferson and Madison, of course, they're going to object to the Alien and Sedition Acts because they're Democrat Republicans, and they're going to write in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions that state legislatures could declare an act of Congress to be unconstitutional, which is a big idea, and it's going to come back again when we start talking about the nullification crisis. The idea that state legislatures can say, well, the Alien and Sedition Acts aren't constitutional, so we're not following them. The problem with that is states really can't say that about the national government's laws. And the lights just went off, so I must be near my time that I have to finish. So let me just conclude by saying the controversy contributed to Jefferson's election in 1800. Jefferson's going to win that election. It actually ends up being a tie between him and the vice presidential candidate, Aaron Burr. And like I told you, there was a problem in how the Constitution was worded, so they're going to fix that with the 12th Amendment. So Jefferson's going to become president, and then Burr is going to go on and shoot at Alexander Hamilton and then do a few other pretty bad things. That concludes the video for 1.6. Please turn in your notes guide with your name on it and a question, and then take the notes guide quiz. Thank you very much for watching.